The Galactic Council was losing their minds, and honestly, who could blame them? Picture this. 47 different alien species crammed into their massive crystal meeting room that probably cost more than our entire space program. And every single one of them was having what you'd call a complete meltdown. You had the Zephyrians with their purple tentacles doing this weird, twitching dance they do when they're stressed. The Ocular Lords were spinning their ice stalks so fast it looked like they might drill holes in the ceiling. And don't even get me started on the Lumina folk. Those glowing patches all over their bodies were flashing red and orange like some kind of alien disco gone wrong. But here's the thing that makes this whole situation absolutely hilarious. What had these super advanced civilizations, some of them thousands of years ahead of us technologically, all worked up into a frenzy? Us. Regular old humans from that little blue dot called Earth. Yeah, the same species that still argues about whether pineapple belongs on pizza and can't figure out how to merge properly on highways. See, what happened was this. We'd just shown up in a galactic neighborhood about 6 months earlier with our spacecraft that, let's be honest, looked like they were built in someone's garage. And they kind of were, if you think about it. These alien species have been watching us through their fancy long-range scanners, probably expecting us to putter around our solar system for another few centuries before we figured out how to travel between stars properly. Instead, we did what humans do best. We improvised, adapted, and overcame. Our ships were held together with what the aliens probably thought was some kind of primitive bonding agent, but was basically just really good welding and a whole lot of hope. Our weapons were simple energy-based systems that any first-year alien engineering student could probably build blindfolded. Our navigation systems were so basic that some species thought we were using them as a joke. But somehow, despite all of this technological disadvantage, we'd managed to establish colonies in 3 different star systems in just 6 months. Not tiny outposts either. We're talking about full settlements with mining operations, research facilities, and even some of our famous human entertainment venues. The aliens were watching us set up what looked suspiciously like shopping malls and coffee shops on distant planets, and they had no idea how to process this information. The Council's military advisors were the worst. These were beings who had conquered entire sectors of space, who had weapons that could crack planets in half, who had been fighting wars for longer than human civilization had existed. They took one look at our fleet and started laughing. Actually laughing. The Krex delegation, known throughout the galaxy for their tactical brilliance, dismissed us with a comment that roughly translated to, these primitive creatures would destroy themselves before they managed to colonize their second planet. General Vorthak, a massive creature that looked like someone had crossed an elephant with a tank, stood up during the initial briefing and declared that humans would be extinct within a decade, victims of our own technological incompetence. The assembled military leaders nodded in agreement, already moving on to discuss more pressing matters like territorial disputes with actually threatening species. But then something started bothering them. It was subtle at first, just a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. See, every other species they encountered followed predictable patterns. Young civilizations either stayed close to home until they developed better technology, or they expanded aggressively and burned out quickly when they bit off more than they could chew. We weren't doing either of those things. We were expanding, sure, but we were doing it in this weird, methodical way that didn't match any of their computer models. We'd establish a colony, make sure it was stable and self-sufficient, then move on to the next system. We weren't rushing, but we weren't being overly cautious either. We were just steady, relentlessly, impossibly steady. And that's what was making even their toughest warriors nervous. Because in all their thousands of years of galactic politics and warfare, they'd learned one universal truth. The most dangerous enemies aren't the ones who threaten you loudly. They're the ones who just keep coming, no matter what you throw at them. And humans? We just kept coming. After all that panic in the council chambers, the aliens decided to try the diplomatic approach first. Smart move, right? They figured maybe these crazy humans just needed some proper galactic etiquette lessons. So they called in the professionals, the Kethvar. Now, if you've never heard of the Kethvar, think of them as the ultimate diplomats of the galaxy. These beings had successfully negotiated peace treaties between species that literally couldn't breathe the same air. They prevented wars, established trade routes, and basically kept the galaxy from falling apart for the last 3,000 years. The Kethvar take their diplomatic protocols very seriously. We're talking about ceremonies that have been perfected over millennia, gift exchanges that follow precise cultural formulas, and greeting rituals that can take hours to complete properly. When they decide to make first contact with new species, it's like watching the most elaborate wedding ceremony you've ever seen, except with more tentacles and fewer flowers. So they selected Ambassador Zexthal for this crucial mission. This wasn't just any random diplomat. Zexthal was their best. This being had personally negotiated 17 major peace accords and had never failed to establish positive relations with a new species. The Kethvar loaded up their most impressive diplomatic vessel with everything they thought humans might want based on their observations of our technology and behavior patterns. Picture this massive, gleaming ship approaching our little human fleet. It's probably worth more than the entire GDP of several Earth nations, covered in precious metals that don't even exist in our solar system, and broadcasting friendship signals in about 40 different languages. The Kethvar had brought rare platinum variants that could revolutionize our technology, knowledge crystals containing thousands of years of accumulated wisdom, and artistic treasures that represented the finest achievements of dozens of civilizations. This was their standard welcome package, the same collection of gifts that had successfully impressed every species they'd ever encountered. Young civilizations typically went crazy for this stuff. Most new species would spend months just figuring out how to properly thank the Kethvar for such incredible generosity. Our response completely broke their diplomatic computer models. Captain Williams, commanding our flagship, sent back a simple message. Thanks for the generous offer, but we're good. How about you come over for coffee instead? We'd love to chat. Just like that. No elaborate acceptance ceremony. No formal gratitude protocols. No careful examination of the gifts to determine their cultural significance. Just an invitation to hang out and drink coffee. The Kethvar diplomatic team spent 3 hours in emergency meetings trying to figure out what this meant. Was it some kind of test? A cultural ritual they didn't understand? Were we rejecting their friendship? Eventually, Zexthal decided to accept our invitation, mostly out of professional curiosity. The ambassador boarded our ship, expecting maybe a quick tour and a brief formal exchange. Instead, Captain Williams met Zexthal at the airlock with a handshake and a genuine smile, then led the way to what humans had apparently designated as a conversation room, basically our mess hall with some extra chairs and a really good coffee machine. What happened next has become legendary in diplomatic circles throughout the galaxy. Zexthal sat down expecting formal presentations about human culture, government structure, and territorial claims. Instead, we just started talking. Captain Williams asked if the ambassador wanted sugar in their coffee, then launched into stories about Earth. Not the official stuff, just regular human stories. Williams talked about growing up on a farm in Kansas, about watching the stars as a kid and wondering what was out there. He shared stories about human struggles, about how we nearly destroyed our own planet before we figured out how to work together. He talked about our art, our music, our ridiculous human habit of making friends with literally any animal we encounter. But here's what really blew Zexthal's mind. We kept asking questions. Not strategic questions about military capabilities or territorial boundaries. We wanted to know everything about alien cultures. How do species that communicate through color changes handle abstract concepts? What's it like to experience the world through echolocation? Do species with multiple brains ever argue with themselves? 14 hours. 14 straight hours of just talking, laughing, sharing stories, and asking questions. Zexthal had never experienced anything like it. Most diplomatic meetings followed strict time limits and formal agendas. This felt more like the ambassador had accidentally stumbled into the galaxy's longest coffee date. When it was time to leave, Captain Williams handed Zexthal a small wooden carving, a dove with its wings spread wide. It's an old symbol from our planet, Williams explained. Represents peace, but also the idea that sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. The captain had carved it himself during quiet moments between missions. Zexthal stumbled back to the Kethvar ship carrying the simple wooden gift, completely bewildered by the entire experience. The ambassador's official report to the council essentially said, I have no idea what just happened, but these humans are impossibly friendly and they never stop asking questions about everything. After that confusing diplomatic encounter, the Galactic Council was getting seriously frustrated. Here they had this new species that didn't follow any of their established patterns, and they needed to figure out what humans were really capable of when push came to shove. The war hawks in the council were getting louder, demanding to know what would happen if humans actually face a real threat. Will we turn tail and run back to our little corner of space? Or will we unleash some hidden military fury that could destabilize the entire sector? So they came up with what they thought was a brilliant plan. Instead of risking open conflict with an unknown quantity, they'd hire some mercenaries to test our response to aggression. This way, they could observe human combat tactics and decision-making under pressure while maintaining plausible deniability. If things went badly, they could always claim it was just random pirate activity that had nothing to do with the Council. The job went to the Crimson Void Raiders, a notorious mercenary group that had been terrorizing trade routes for decades. These weren't small-time pirates we're talking about. The raiders had heavy assault ships, military-grade weapons, and a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in combat. They'd taken on government fleets before and won. The Council figured if anything could show them what humans were really made of, it would be a surprise attack from professional killers. The setup was perfect from the Council's perspective. The raiders would hit one of our smaller cargo convoys, far enough from our main settlements that we couldn't call for immediate backup. Our response would tell them everything they needed to know about human nature. Most species either panicked and retreated when faced with superior firepower, or they went into full aggressive mode and tried to hunt down their attackers for revenge. The attack itself went exactly as planned. The raiders jumped our convoy near the edge of the Kepler 442 system, disabled our escort ships, and made off with a significant amount of cargo. It was textbook piracy, quick, efficient, and designed to send a message. The Council's observers settled in to watch what they assumed would be either a hasty human retreat or a massive military response. What happened next broke every single one of their prediction models. Our response was swift, sure, but not in any way they expected. Instead of mobilizing our battle fleet or abandoning the sector, we did something that had literally never happened in recorded galactic history. We tracked down the pirates' base of operations, which took our intelligence teams about 3 days, and then we sent in a single small ship, not a warship, not a strike team, a diplomatic vessel. The Council observers thought we'd lost our minds. Here was this tiny human ship approaching a heavily fortified pirate stronghold, broadcasting peaceful intentions and requesting permission to dock. The raiders were just as confused as everyone else. In their experience, victims either came back with massive fleets looking for revenge, or they stayed away entirely. Nobody had ever just knocked on their door asking to talk. The human who stepped off that ship was Dr. Helen Rodriguez, a soft-spoken woman with graying hair who looked like she should be teaching at university somewhere, not negotiating with space pirates. She was completely alone, carrying nothing but a briefcase and wearing the kind of patient smile that kindergarten teachers perfect after years of dealing with difficult children. The pirates had weapons trained on her from 6 different angles, and she just calmly asked if there was somewhere they could sit down and have a conversation. What followed was the most bizarre interrogation in pirate history, except it wasn't really an interrogation at all. Dr. Rodriguez didn't demand information or threaten retaliation. She just asked questions. Simple questions. How long had they been operating in this sector? What had driven them to piracy in the first place? Were there things they needed that they couldn't get through legitimate means? The pirate warlord, a massive creature called Thrax who'd been raiding shipping lanes for over 20 years, found himself actually answering. Maybe it was a novelty of someone treating him like a person instead of a monster. Maybe it was the way Dr. Rodriguez really listened, without judgment or interruption. Or maybe it was just that nobody had bothered to ask these questions before. The truth that came out over the next several hours changed everything. These weren't evil space criminals who enjoyed causing suffering. They were refugees from dying star systems where the local suns were failing. They were former miners whose worlds had been strip-mined by major corporations and then abandoned. They were traders whose routes had been shut down by territorial disputes between major powers, leaving them with no legal way to make a living. Dr. Rodriguez listened to story after story of desperation, of families scattered across the galaxy, of people who turned to piracy not out of greed, but out of sheer survival. Within a week, she negotiated something unprecedented: job offers for former pirates, fair trade agreements for their home systems, and technical assistance to help failing colonies become self-sufficient again. The Council's military test had backfired spectacularly. Instead of revealing our combat capabilities, we'd shown them something far more dangerous from their perspective. We demonstrated that humans had this terrifying habit of actually solving problems instead of just fighting them. After word got out about what happened with the pirates, something absolutely wild started happening across the galaxy. It was like humans had accidentally started some kind of cosmic chain reaction, except instead of explosions, it was cooperation breaking out everywhere. And the Galactic Council was watching their carefully maintained status quo crumble in real time. Picture this. Conflicts that had been raging for literally centuries were suddenly getting resolved. Take the Helix Nebula War, for example. The Zartanian Republic and the Morvet Collective had been shooting at each other for over 400 years over mining rights in a disputed asteroid field. For 100 years, generations of both species had grown up knowing nothing but hatred for their enemies across the void. Then some human mediators showed up. Not diplomats with fancy titles or military backgrounds, just regular people who'd volunteered for what we called our Galactic Friendship Initiative. They set up a simple meeting space on a neutral station, provided coffee and snacks, and basically said, "Hey, want to just talk about this without the weapons for a change?" What happened next made headlines across 17 different news networks. Within 6 weeks, both sides had not only stopped fighting, but had formed a joint mining cooperative. The Zartanians brought their advanced extraction technology. The Morvex contributed their superior processing techniques. And suddenly they were making more profit together than they'd ever made fighting over scraps. But that was just the beginning. Humans had this weird habit of introducing species to each other that had never even considered working together. We'd host these cultural exchange programs that were basically giant friendly parties where different aliens could hang out, share food, and learn about each other's cultures. Sounds simple, right? Except it was revolutionary. The silicon-based Christek had always assumed that carbon-based life forms were too chaotic and unpredictable to work with. Then they met some human artists who introduced them to jazz music, and suddenly the Christek were collaborating with organic species on musical compositions that created entirely new art forms. Their crystalline structures could resonate with sound in ways that created visual patterns, turning music into literal light shows. Meanwhile, the aquatic depth dwellers had spent thousands of years thinking land-based species were too crude and simplistic for meaningful interaction, until they attended one of our science fairs and met some human marine biologists who were absolutely fascinated by underwater civilization building. Next thing you know, they're sharing advanced water purification technology and learning about human ocean conservation efforts. The really crazy part was how we approached technology sharing. Every other species in the galaxy hoarded their advanced tech, like it was the crown jewels. Information was power, and power meant survival in the competitive galactic marketplace. But humans? We just handed out our innovations to anyone who asked nicely. Our fusion reactor designs went to struggling colonies that needed clean energy. Our medical advances got shared with species dealing with plague outbreaks. We even taught agricultural techniques to civilizations that had been importing all their food for generations. The galactic economy, which had been built on scarcity and competition, started shifting toward abundance and cooperation. Then humans started doing something that really freaked out the old guard. We began preserving cultures that were dying out. There were entire alien languages that only a few dozen individuals still spoke. Ancient art forms that were being forgotten as younger generations moved toward more modern pursuits. Historical traditions that were disappearing as species became more integrated into galactic society. We documented everything. Human linguists worked with elderly aliens to record dying languages. Our historians collaborated with species to preserve their cultural memories. We even established what we call cultural heritage centers, where different civilizations could maintain their traditions while still participating in the broader galactic community. But the moment that really sent shockwaves to the Council was when the Veltar Empire made their announcement. Now, You have to understand, the Veltar were the galaxy's premier military power. These beings had conquered 17 star systems through pure military might. Their society was built on strength, hierarchy, and the absolute rule of the strongest. They were the kind of civilization that other species either allied with or hid from. Emperor Kethnax had been ruling through fear and force for over 60 years. Then some human philosophers visited their capital world for a cultural exchange. They weren't trying to overthrow anything or start revolution. They just wanted to learn about Veltar society and share some ideas about governance and social organization. The conversations that followed lasted for months. Human thinkers like Dr. Patricia Chun and Professor David Kim sat with Veltar leaders and discussed different approaches to leadership, community organization, and decision-making. They talked about human history, about our own struggles with authoritarian rule, and about the benefits they'd observed from more collaborative approaches. When Emperor Kethnax quietly announced that the Veltar Empire was transitioning to collaborative governance and would be establishing elected councils in all their territories, the Galactic Council finally realized what they were really dealing with. Humans weren't conquering the galaxy through force or even through superior technology. We were accidentally making it better, one conversation at a time. And somehow, that was way more terrifying than any weapon they'd ever encountered. The final emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in their 3,000-year history. The massive crystal chamber that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the negotiation of countless treaties, and the careful balance of galactic power was now filled with shouting, accusations, and something that hadn't been seen there in centuries: complete political chaos. Council leader Vex Marin called for order repeatedly, but nobody was listening anymore. The War faction, led by the militaristic Korvac alliance, was demanding immediate action. General Thromax, his battle scars glowing angry red across his armor hide, stood at the center of the chamber bellowing about the human infection that was spreading across civilized space. "They're destroying everything we've built," Thromax roared, his voice echoing off the crystal walls. "Our economic systems, our political structures, our entire way of life, all of it crumbling because of these primitive creatures and their dangerous ideas about cooperation." The Korvac weren't alone in their panic. The Merchant Guild were terrified because humans were disrupting their carefully controlled trade monopolies by teaching species to develop their own resources and trade directly with each other. The old aristocratic families who'd maintained power for millennia were watching their authority evaporate as more civilizations adopted human-inspired democratic reforms. Ambassador Quextal from the banking consortium was practically vibrating with fury. "Do you realize what they've done to our lending operations? Entire sectors are becoming economically self-sufficient. They're sharing technology freely, creating cooperative agreements that bypass our financial structures entirely. We're looking at the complete collapse of the galactic economy as we know it." But as the war hawks continued their rants, something strange started happening. Other council members weren't joining in. Instead, they were sitting quietly, looking uncomfortable, even guilty. When General Thromax called for an immediate vote to declare humanity a hostile species and authorize military intervention, the response wasn't what anyone expected. The silence that followed was deafening. Council leader Vex Marin asked for all those in favor of military action to signal their agreement. Less than a third of the assembled representatives responded. When asked for those opposed, another third actively voted against the measure. But the real shock was the middle third. They abstained entirely, refusing to take either side. That's when the real chaos began. Accusations started flying. How could loyal council members refuse to protect the established galactic order? Who else had been secretly working with human advisors? The war faction demanded answers, and slowly, reluctantly, the truth started coming out. Senator KLYX Nor from the Outer Rim Coalition quietly admitted that human economists had helped them restructure their trade agreements, resulting in unprecedented prosperity for their member worlds. Ambassador Yell from the Spiral Federation confessed that human mediators had resolved a territorial dispute that had been draining their resources for decades. The admissions kept coming. The Crystal Cities had worked with human urban planners to solve massive overcrowding problems. The nomad fleets had collaborated with human engineers to develop more efficient life support systems. Even some of the previously neutral species admitted they've been quietly consulting with human experts on everything from environmental restoration to social welfare programs. "You don't understand," pleaded Counselor Threnax from the Reformed Territories. "We've seen what happens when species actually work together instead of constantly competing. Our people are happier, more prosperous, more secure than they've been in generations. How can we vote to destroy that?" While the council chamber erupted in arguments and recriminations, the communication stations around the room kept beeping with incoming messages. More reports were flooding in from across the galaxy. The frontier worlds were formally requesting human assistance with establishing sustainable colonies. 3 different species had asked for help mediating a complex resource-sharing agreement. The Academic Alliance wanted human philosophers to participate in a galaxy-wide conference on ethics and governance. The most shocking report came from the isolationist hegemony, a civilization that had refused all outside contact for over 500 years. They were requesting a formal diplomatic meeting with human representatives, citing their interest in what they called the human approach to interspecies relations. As the reports kept coming, even some of the war hawks started to realize what they were really facing. This was an invasion or a conquest in any traditional sense. Humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. We made cooperation more attractive than competition. We'd proven that working together produced better results than fighting over resources. General Thromax, his voice now quiet and almost defeated, made one final observation that silenced the entire chamber. "They're not conquering us with weapons or technology. They're conquering us with the idea that we're all worth listening to, that every species has something valuable to contribute. And the truly terrifying part is, they're right. The vote to declare war on humanity failed by a massive margin. Instead, the Council passed a resolution that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. They formally invited human representatives to participate in future Council sessions as permanent advisory members. The galaxy's most frightening species had won without firing a single shot, simply by believing that everyone had something valuable to offer and then proving it true, one conversation at a time. The age of human influence in the galaxy had officially begun, not through conquest, but through the radical idea that cooperation was better than conflict.